Let's just jump in. All right, so now we should be live. So how do we want to do this? Ole, do you want to walk through it, or Igor, or what's the preferred order?
I think Igor would be the best person to talk about the internal things of the API. So Igor, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I put on the spotlight straight away. Do you want me to? We actually are sharing. We might start with the last one, the FileDialog.ClientGuid. Might be sort of the simplest one, a quick one. That's a relatively new proposal. It's basically to extend FileDialog and allow it to remember last settings user had for the FileDialog. The underlying API sort of persists the state, and by exposing that API, that would allow users to have multiple states persisted in the application, just switch between them when they open the FileDialog.
Yeah.
What is this GUID?
I think you just create a GUID and associate it with a particular dialog, and when you want to retrieve the same state, you just, I'm not sure.
Oh, I see what's happening. So I guess the idea is that each user of the dialog has its own GUID, and when a GUID is set, then Windows will take care of retrieving and storing that thing on behalf of that single GUID.
Yes.
I see.
Ultimately, we'll be just exposing the underlying Win32 functionality. It's not something we're creating in WinForms as such.
There's something somebody's sharing that I can see, or am I supposed to know an issue number to go look at?
Am I not sharing the
No,
screen?
you should see it on the screen.
I see it on the screen.
Do not see it.
If you look down the bottom, amongst the avatars.
I got it now. Sorry about that, Igor. I got it.
Cool.
Okay.
So this kind of lines up with our general desire to continue to add on to WinForms to expose more of the Windows API.
Totally.
Correct.
Right.
So I have one high-level question before we go into more into these things. So how do we, I mean, some of these, I guess, require OS support, right? Like, what's our baseline, and like, what happens when you run on an OS that is lower? We don't care, or like, is everything we expose basically on OSs that we support for .NET, so we never have this problem that the person runs on something lower than what a particular API or property needs?
Most of these, I believe, are Vista Plus, so I don't think we have to worry about OSs not supporting them.
Correct. We haven't encountered any API which were added in Windows 8 or 10 so far. So all the changes we're making and all the proposals in this session, they were added in Windows 7 or Windows Vista time.
I see. All right, that makes sense, and then I guess I don't have any concerns. Anybody else? Otherwise, I mean, naming seems fine to me.
And you intended for this to be nullable GUID because it's the only nullable property on this entire type?
We are planning to decorate and add more nullable, so the nullable reference types in the future. In this particular scenario, I think it's just to signify it can be null, because it's hard to express it otherwise.
Well, this is an actual nullable of T, though, not just a nullable annotation. That's what I was curious.
Yeah, it's a nullable.
I would
the
bet
method
this
which takes null.
Okay.
Yeah, and you know, Levi, this probably pre-exists .NET 2, where we added nullable value types, right? So.
Oh yeah, and
Yeah.
I didn't mean to imply that it was the wrong thing. I just wanted to make sure that because it kind of was an outlier, that it was the right thing to add. That's all.
Yeah, that's fair.
is GUID.empty a valid client GUID?
I'm just looking at the underlying Win32 docs. It just basically says it's a ref GUID. So I suppose if you put an empty that would have all zeros, ultimately that property returns either success or failure. So if you're associated with the wrong GUID, I suppose you just will have a state reset for your file dialog as opposed to retrieving the existing state.
So does Windows not have a corresponding get one? They only have a set one?
They have a set one.
If they don't have a get one, then yeah, they don't have the problem, right? Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking that the Win32 is just a member of some struct or something where basically the non-existing one would basically be all zeros, but if they just have a method that you call or not call, then it's effectively nullable on their side too, right? It's just done differently. Yeah, I think it's reasonable to make that nullable. I think it's the most logical way to do that. Nobody has any objections, then I will just approve this because it seems straightforward enough.
Well, I'm looking through the Windows docs and implementation, and it looks like they actually just turn the GUID into a string. So is there an API which just sets a persistence key in general that doesn't take a GUID? Because that would be ideally the thing that would be most generic.
The FileDialog interface doesn't have anything which takes a string for that particular purpose.
Okay, so it sounds like this is the only way to do it then. Okay, sounds good.
All right, go to the next one.
All right, let me just mark it first before we do anything else, so I don't forget it. All right, so then let's scroll up. Which one?
Okay, well, let's go to the list view. Let's start with that. Support footers. Let's go that one. Yep.
I have no
So we have several for list view group. The list view itself has been extended and made more feature rich around Vista timeframe, and because of that, list view implementation .NET Framework lacked these implementations for fear of breaking early versions. Now, because we're supporting Windows 7, we're able to extend the current API with the things we're missing. So I think if you scroll down, there should be a picture task. Yeah, there you go. So that little task, which adds in the upper right corner, this is what the proposal is. So a user would be able to add a task, which you can see. I think you can make it different text as well.
It's pretty useful.
Yeah.
What to say, that looks pretty powerful. I wish I had that back in the day.
Yeah. Doesn't look like it's used much. I haven't seen this around a lot of UI.
Yeah, I think it was available in Explorer under some weird conditions, but I haven't seen it recently. So if you scroll up, it's basically what the API should look like, the proposal. So we would have to extend the ListViewGroup to expose the task, and then we would have to add like event handlers and the event args.
What's the group link?
So group is that right at the top of the animation, you can see that the header, that's where that group is. That's part of the ListViewGroup. So that header information, that horizontal line, that's the group.
Oh, I see.
If
So,
you scroll a bit
like
lower.
in Windows Explorer, you can group items, say by name, by type, etc., and you would have a divider, and typically it's collapsible. So that thing is a group.
I see. So basically, yeah, the only thing that confuses me here, you have this thing called, in the constructor you call it column, and then you say here group link. And I guess this int is that int, right? So they're the same ones.
Oh, I didn't look at that.
I would just make it the same, and I mean.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, column. Yeah, it looks a bit strange here. Oh, I suppose here he modeled it after column click. I suppose when he copied the definition, he may have not renamed the column to whatever it meant to be, which is group link, I presume.
Copy paste. I have never made those mistakes. Okay, that makes sense. And then this is all on the root namespace then, I suppose, too, right?
Yeah, we're just adding an additional property into existing class, and we're adding new classes for the event handler and the event args, which will live in the same namespace.
Yeah, what do you reckon? Do you want to keep doing this pattern where you basically declare delegates, or do you want to move to the event handler of T thing where you don't have to do that moving forward?
I don't have a particular strong feeling about it.
I mean, WinForms has done that, but at the same time, I also don't think it's helping anybody when we keep doing that. It's just you add more and more types to the namespace, which I'm not sure is necessarily helpful.
I'm certainly happy to make it an event handler type of T.
But
If that,
would that just be there's no place else for doing that yet, is it, Ema? Are we used to do that anyplace
we've
else?
introduced event handler of T in Whitby, right, 2005. So since 2005, pretty much across the BCL, whenever we declare an event handler, we usually use just event handler of event arcs, right? We don't.
Are we doing it in WinForms? Was my question for the WinForms service.
Yeah, I think that's
We
something.
haven't done because the code base is old, but moving forward for .NET 5, we can start doing it, and for all new features, we can do that. I like that idea.
This whole list view, it again, it's the predating thing, right? Like I said with Nullable, it predates generics. So we didn't do that. It's a question of whether we think, this is how we should do it moving forward, or whether we say, no, we should be consistent with how it was, even if it's what I would consider silly, I kind of feel like we should, if it were my opinion, I would say, go ahead and use it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. To me, like, consistency is usually an argument, but like it seems like sprinkling more type in the forms namespace, I don't think is helping the technology much. And if you use event handler of T, it doesn't seem odd, in my opinion. It seems like
no, and it doesn't affect the consumer, right? The consumption code looks exactly the same. The only time is when they're like, well, I need to, I need to capture that somewhere and use it. Now they have to use a generic, and that's been 15 years. Yep. So if they're not comfortable with it, it's tough. That's my feeling.
That sounds fine to me. I thought it was very early in that decision. I wanted to make sure we were being thoughtful about making it. So
yeah, I agree. And I mean, it's kind of a policy decision, right? It's like, okay, this would be how we do this, right? And so it's good to call out.
Right. It didn't feel like just a decision on this little API. I think it's a fine decision, but great.
Cool. All right. So we'll take it as a way to move forward to strive for event tags or event handler of T, as opposed to creating new event handler types.
How are we doing that in the task dialog right now? I don't recall.
Oh.
It's just something to take into that discussion. That's all I'm saying.
Yes,
I think it's the new
well,
should be the new way moving forward.
correct. Yes. All right. So back to the API. Any concerns?
So then, based on what we just said, this is what I have right now. So we said like this thing should match this guy here, and if we use event handler of t, this is what it will look like.
Yeah.
Everybody good with that?
And interesting. Sorry, go on.
Justin, would that have any implication with Visual Basic and the handclick clause?
Sorry? The handles clause? No, I don't believe so.
Okay.
I don't believe so. I believe the handles clause is orthogonal to the delegate type doesn't really matter. It's just whether it whether the you can, as long as you can still create with events fields with in VB with a generic event handler, and I believe you can should be fine. I believe you can.
Klaus, can you just double check that? I think we have
It's worth checking. Yeah.
broader problems. If that is not the case, then we have broader problems. I'm pretty sure that it's fine to use those generically, but we should check.
Yeah, and if you can't use it generically, please file a bug with a compiler that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think that one we have to fix.
Yeah, Alexa will fix it.
I was rather thinking about code serialization and WinForms, if that might be a problem, that we have to rewrite a lot of things.
Or I mean, in the designer when you wire it up.
Yeah.
Hopefully not.
I don't think so.
I mean, from your point of view, it's just the type, right? And like, it should just whether it has angle brackets on it or not shouldn't really matter.
No parentheses with of. Emma.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it's worth checking at least.
Yeah, double check it, and if so, then then that can become policy.
The one person in the chat is asking is group link the index, or what actually is that number representing?
I'm afraid I can't answer that question.
Basically, he's saying like if it's the index, I guess it should be kind of like imply that somewhere. But
yeah, I'll work with QB to find out exactly what it is and look it into myself.
Let me just add a comment. Is group link the best name for the concept? What is it? Some kind of index. It's the name. Should. Okay. All right. Sweet. Let me just refresh here. So we proved two things. We're kind of on a roll now.
All right, let's go to the footers or subtitles. It's like continued in the same spirit of ListView. So subtitles is very similar.
Mm-hmm.
See that new footer?
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, sorry, the subtitle under the header.
Yeah.
That little text. It's basically allowing to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That seems very reasonable to me.
Yeah, that seems like a no-brainer to me.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know what else you would call it. And I take it that you have not done any nullable annotations yet, right?
No. We currently blocked by WPF, so we cannot take the latest runtime, and we cannot take full. We cannot go full steam ahead with nullable decorations because we cannot use some of the analyzers.
Makes sense.
Yeah, hopefully it will be fixed soon, and yeah.
All right, and next one.
Okay, footer's pretty much the same. If you scroll down to the image, that new footer text and the alignment of that text is what the proposal is.
Yeah, that makes sense too.
Yeah, I mean, assuming it came in Vista, sure.
Yeah.
Do we know what we would do if it would have come in Windows 8?
I suppose we would have to start working somehow, but we haven't considered that so far.
Yeah, we can cross this bridge when it comes to it, but in many ways you can probably get away with ignore, right? Like these particular instances, for example, you set a footer and the API doesn't support setting one, well then too bad, you just don't have one.
Mm.
It's probably not horrible.
Yeah, on Win32, at Win32 level, these if-defs, we probably don't want to do that, and like you said, we can probably just ignore setting. But we'll still have to do all the imports. We'll have to define all the structs to allow that, and we may have to do if-defs somehow too.
Right, so this is done as well.
Cool.
So,
let's go to
TreeNode or something else?
the top one, LV column. So that's still the list view. So
It's going to be the best release for ListView ever.
Yeah. Well, that control in particular has been neglected, or it has received a massive uplift in Vista timeframe.
Yeah, it hasn't been neglected by Windows. We've neglected to update, right?
Yeah.
They've been doing stuff.
Yeah, I'm talking about WinForms. Yeah.
We do want to do some good accessibility testing on this.
Okay, so this particular one is to be able to set a minimal width. So the column text, a column in itself, can be constrained minimally.
We need to make sure that you can access that column header and resize capability programmatically, or with your mouse, with keyboard, not with a mouse only.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that would be in general, right?
Yeah, I think that's.
Yeah, I don't think that affects this API.
That's a general thing. My concern is Windows has been neglectful in some places in their controls, and I don't want to go exposing inaccessible APIs from Windows that we don't already have.
Well, to be fair, you could have done this with a Win32 API as well in your app and had the same problem. I mean, the accessibility of this, yeah.
That's true. That's not.
We should double check and kind of make sure it's right. But yeah.
Exactly. And hopefully we can convince Windows to fix it if it's not.
Totally.
All right. So this is a minimum width. So if you scroll down, please, Tilda.
Oh, I see now. The
next one is to make it fixed width, so a user is unable to change it. So which is in the same space as the previous feature.
Yep.
So you would have like a minimum width and the fixed width properties. If you scroll down, there's like one more proposal.
Yep. And slow today. There we go.
So that's just to make.
Oh yeah.
I'm not exactly sure what use case that would address, but that's existing functionality in Win32.
Well, it lets you have a drop down as opposed to just sorting, right? By clicking the column header, it gives you an ability to put some sort of options on it, right?
Yeah, good point.
I see. So you just get the click event, right? So you get to pop the context menu or whatever you want to do with it.
Right, you can do whatever you want there, as opposed to just like, no, it sorts or it doesn't sort, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I suppose you can implement something like Excel has, where you can have custom filtering on the column.
Totally. That seems super useful.
So, in the same spirit as we discussed in the previous one of the previous API, instead of creating a new handler class, we would just use a handler of T.
Yeah, that's what I was doing here too. Although in this case, it seems like it's already reused, right? Isn't the column drop-down click handler already there? It already exists, right? No, it does not.
Or if it exists, then we just use whatever.
No, I can't find it, so you must have omitted that declaration. So in that case, let's just declare it as the event handler of this guy, and then that should be it. Boom, boom, boom. Interesting. So, what about this one in the discussion that he still has?
It's a question how to specify whether to create an enumeration which controls the style of the header.
Do these correspond directly to enumeration flags in the Windows API?
To be honest, I haven't looked at how it would get implemented.
Sure. So the reason I ask is because when we're wrapping the Windows API, if we're just passing flags into it, then we should probably represent those as flags here because it's a natural mapping. But if we're actually calling properties on the Windows API, we're calling
they're actually flags. Would you mind scrolling up a bit, please?
Oh, sorry, I'm in the wrong view again. Yeah, I'm scrolling my own view, which doesn't help you.
Stop. Oh, doesn't matter. See that under fixed width column, it basically says we set the LVCF FMT flag on the mask and the other flag on FMT. That's what we would be setting on the underlying structs we send to intro.
I kind of disagree with Levi because the problem with Win32 structs and flags are usually a grab bag of shit, and the development experience with flags is generally not that great, especially in C# and VB when you have to like wrap your head around how to set and unset a single bit in it.
Sure.
I think honestly, like a Boolean property, if they're all independent choices, seem fine. If they're mutually exclusive, then maybe.
There might also be designer support for this.
True. I mean, properties already have simple designer story.
If there's designer support, then a property is definitely the natural choice.
So we have something like public class column header, in which we have a public column header style property which has one of these three options.
I think the designer already renders them as individual checkboxes. I think there's already like.
Yes, it does. For flags enums, it already does. It puts them in checks for you.
I guess that's fair. I mean, you don't really do UI in code, so maybe then that's also fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Like my experience with Win32 has been that a good chunk of the flags you don't want to expose as the flags because it becomes this grab bag of stuff. But I don't know. Like I don't have strong views one way or the other. Like I think the Boolean seems fine.
As in Boolean for what?
like individual Boolean values for fixed width and the drop-down style, having them individual boots seems fine to me.
Rather than having enumeration, like having two different booleans.
I think what would tip me over towards the flags enum would be if you have multiple types that need that, because instead of defining the same properties in different types, you can just have one in each type that has all of them. But given that it's single use, I honestly think Booleans seem more logical to me.
Okay.
Anybody else in the call have a different opinion, or am I just...
I agree with Emo. The bools are good enough for now, especially if there's only two. But if it's going to be repeated in multiple places, then making the enum means it'll stay consistent.
Cool.
Assuming you can get it.
All right, then let me just paste what I have.
So we're basically just adding 3 new properties. One is for minimum width, one is for fixed width, and one is for split button.
And then the event, right?
Yeah. And the plumbing to facilitate that.
I love that these animations are just continually playing on the screen.
That's awesome, right? Actually, that's one of the things. That's probably the only API where we can look at something instead of just code.
Hey, it's really useful for understanding. Like, kudos.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd recommend animate just for any more of these security reviews, Levi. That'd be good.
Okay.
I want to see like blue screens and stuff, you know, or compromises, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I think I messed up. I should have merged this guy with that guy. Wait, now it's even more messed up. Apparently copy pasting is also for experts. I'm not one of them. Alright, here we go.
Cool. Thank you.
Alright, then let's hit refresh again and see how far we are. Sweet.
We're almost done. Let's go to the let's go to that one. So that's a slightly different control.
Now we're in animation land.
Yeah, there are more animations. So it's a TrackBar. So that blue thingy. There's multiple missing bits and pieces from Win32 we have.
Oh shit.
Yeah, so here's a proposal to add to show selection range and where selection starts and selection ends.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, makes sense.
And the value of the TrackBar is a system.int. It's system.int32. So there's selection start and selection end would match those.
Yes, I think that's right. I think the value, the maximum, the minimum, I believe those are all just ints. It doesn't support any floating point.
I guess one question here, whether selection start or selection end should be presented as two properties or one property, like a selection range. For instance, month calendar has a selection range.
Which type did you refer to as that?
If you scroll down a little bit, there's discussion points.
It'd have to be a new selection range type because the one on month calendar is actually date times, if I recall.
True. No, I'm just saying like whether we should introduce new, presented as two properties, being SelectionStart, SelectionEnd, or have a struct which contains maybe two fields.
I mean, if only we had a range type in the BCL.
Yeah. I don't know, is this exclusive or inclusive, Emma?
I have no idea. This one is probably going to be inclusive, would be my guess.
I think you do. I'm not sure, though. I think, yeah, you do.
Yeah, I think using range here will probably be weird. I think that's... Because you already have maximum and minimum as independent things as well. Seems odd to then have then the selection as a range.
That's true.
There's the comment currently at the bottom of the screen that the negative values are supported, and our range type, or rather our index type, doesn't support negative values. So we can't use system.range.
That's a good point, actually. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the SelectionStart, SelectionEnd makes sense. Like, doesn't W?
Yeah,
sorry.
Given that we have maximum and minimum, so having two extra properties probably makes it consistent.
Yeah.
In that sense.
And SelectionStart, SelectionEnd is also something that's used elsewhere in WinForms, so that's also sensible. Yeah, I think it's...
Based on the open question or discussion points regarding defaults, if there's no selection, given that all values could be legal, maybe the property should be nullable. So they're null if there's no selection, and there's a value if there is one. But I don't know if that's breaking consistency with existing WinForms types. We can also have one has selection that tells you whether the two properties are sensible or are just zero because they were uninitialized.
Yeah, I mean, before we add a property that allows them to specify what the sentinel is for non-selected, I'd rather do nullable, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, what was the behavior if SelectionStart or SelectionEnd was outside of the min-max range of the trackbar?
Probably you throw embedded operation exception would be my guess.
So doesn't that mean that they can't have sentinel values in at all?
Pretty much, because you know your min and your max can have negative numbers, right? So you can specify any range, and I mean you could use in min value and in max value probably safely, and then just say you can't use them as min and max. But
right, I guess what I'm thinking of is, say that you have a trackbar which is currently being displayed to the user and does not have any selection capabilities turned on.
Right.
Now the developer wants to say, okay, let me start showing the selection. Here's the start, here's the end. Do they have to call these property setters in a very particular order to avoid exceptions?
That's a good question.
No, I don't think that should be the case. I think these properties flow into a struct which then sends to Win32. So you sort of set the state. I believe that's how it works.
But
so you set the properties and then call a method that says, please update the trackbar now?
I'm gonna look it up now.
Because normally, and this is a more general problem, not just trackbar, but normally when you have properties that are dependent on each other's values, we've seen cases in the past where you now have ordering considerations between those properties, where you now have to set the properties in the right order, or else you get strange behavior at runtime. Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to avoid with these questions.
Right, because like if the trackbar is defined as being values 10 to 1,000, and you set SelectionEnd to 900, now SelectionStart to 0 and is already out of range, and what state are you in? So it's possible maybe they would need to be get-only properties, and then there's a set selection range that takes the start and the end together, so they can at least atomically be set in range.
I mean, what does textbox do? I think textbox has them as individual settable things, right?
Well,
Yeah, I think
looking
that's
at the
start and length, though, isn't it?
looking at the Win32 API for the TrackBar control, there's TBM set range, max and min, and one of the parameters is whether or not you want to redraw.
Well, it looks like in WinForms implementation, whenever you set a property, it just sends a message to the underlying Win32 with the property with the property value. Although we have some, I guess, sanity checks to say when you're setting a max value, that it's not less than the mean value, and things like that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point though. On the text box, you don't set selection start and end. You set selection start and length. That kind of avoids that problem.
That could be another option where you just set like I want to start, and that's how long I want my selection bit.
Yeah. Because this one you can set out of order, right? Because your length can never be what your valid range is. And I suppose when you set a minimum, and I ask for selection start, and it's, 0 is not a valid minimum value anymore, then selection start value returns, something sensible.
And this way you don't need to have any sentinel values, because if your selection length is 0, you have no selection.
Right, it implicitly sets the end for you.
Right.
And your selection start, like by default, would be where your, I guess, font is.
Yep.
And then you can set it to whatever. And if you try to set it outside the boundaries, that's an exception.
Yep. All right. Let me put this in.
It doesn't look like he spelled out all the properties, but in the animation you see there are a few additional properties like connect thumb to end. That will need to become, I don't know whether it's a Boolean property or whether it's just something he does programmatically. And it doesn't require any API.
Which ones are you talking about?
See on the bottom animation.
Yeah.
He will be just about, he clicked the connect thumb to end. So when thumb is, because I don't have the access to his harness application, it's hard to tell whether it requires a special API or whether it's just done programmatically somehow.
Oh, so what you're saying, I mean, show thumb, I guess, already exists on TrackBar.
Yeah, thumb should be existing. Although it's switching on and off. Let's have a look at the API.
Yeah.
It actually doesn't look like it's an existing API.
Yeah,
so we'd probably have to have. Yeah, go on.
I assume, like looking at the way the program is behaving, it seems like that's just a mode that was written to show that you can change it while dragging the thumb, probably just using the on update loop of the thumb position change to move the selection end.
Maybe. Yeah. So I asked him to share the harness, but unfortunately he didn't. Looking at the current TrackBar API, I don't see any API which allow to turn thumb visible or invisible. So there may be another property, just show thumb or thumb visible. Not sure which one's better.
Is it maybe tick style? Probably not, right? Yeah, I mean, it seems reasonable, even if he calls it show thumb, I think that would be not entirely unreasonable. Also, I think thumb width is also not there, right?
Thumb width. Can you change the width of the thumb? Oh, there is, yeah. So it looks like we may need to add a few more properties like thumb width and show thumb.
Yeah. I mean, maybe 5 separate items for that?
Yep.
Yeah. All right.
But in general, would there be any, I guess, concern with just having additional properties?
No. Seems reasonable to me.
Yeah.
I mean, they all seem very much independent from each other, so.
Cool. Right, so the outcome of this that we'll have show selection range, start and the length. Cool.
Yeah.
And obviously, if selection start is less than minimum, we'll throw, and if selection length is greater than the available range, we throw as well. Is that the correct understanding?
So when will you throw?
So if selection start is less than minimum, we throw, like invalid operation, I guess. And if the selection length is greater than the available range, we throw as well.
When you say available, do you mean based on selection start or just based on min to max?
Based on min max.
Okay.
What does
You
Textbox
still have
do?
an ordering problem of when you're building up the control, you have to now set the minimum and maximum before you can set the selection start and end, which is maybe fine. Just in general, we don't like when properties have to be set in a particular order. I know that sometimes it's unavoidable.
But does it make it's a good point? But does it make sense to you set a selection before you actually know what your range is?
Probably not.
But the control supports I support initialize, and you would do it when you set the control up in initialize component with begin init and end init, so it wouldn't really matter, right?
I mean, there's just also a question of if you already have a selection and then you programmatically change the minimum and maximum, is that going to throw because now it would invalidate the selection? So there's just a lot of state that goes on between these things, and I don't know what a good answer is. I just know to ask questions.
Oh, that's a good. So in that case, what should we do? Should we just limit? If I set selection to 1,000, although my range is 100, should I just select up to the maximum and just ignore the rest? Would that be a better user experience?
Possibly. I mean, because if you're limiting length based on the range of maximum to minimum, like if you set selection start to maximum and then length to the full range, you're like that wasn't in your description of what would throw, but it's already nonsense. So there are a lot of nonsense states here, and some things either we end up capping effectively or there's a on refresh it throws, but that feels really bad. So it's probably just cap it so that we don't make Win32 angry. Hopefully Win32 is just offensive against us already, we can just pass it straight through.
That's what I'm hoping. And I was kind of asking also, what is? I mean, since we're kind of borrowing from that model, what does Textbox do here? When does it throw? And would that be sensible to a user that's already familiar with these kinds of WinForms controls if it just operated kind of the same?
Okay, I'll do some extra investigation just to better define whether we throw or whether we just ignore them and cap.
If I understand the code, textbox.selectionLength will throw if based on the presumably already set value of SelectionStart, you would exceed length.
Right, and so that one has that same kind of state problem we're talking about.
Right. It assumes you set them in the order probably minimum, maximum, then start, then length, and probably doesn't gracefully handle changing minimum and maximum after that point, and being in a sane state. I guess it doesn't have minimum and maximum. It has you had text in the box, and then you typed and it changed the control entirely. But it does mean there's precedent for throwing because of out of order sets in WinForms.
No, it looks like in the text box implementation, we have a method called adjust selection start and end, which tries to gracefully set start and end of the selection without throwing.
Like it tries to adjust it so that the values are within range. Yeah, that seems reasonable too.
Is that when they type? Because I'm looking at selection length or textbox.selection length, the setter. If it's less than 0, throw argument out of range. Oh no, it doesn't throw it. If it would exceed the length, it trims it to the length. Okay, never mind.
So it does try and do it gracefully. Well, that sounds better. Too.
That makes no sense. Otherwise, it tries to just make something that won't invalidate the stack state or the.
Okay, so for selection length, we just basically cap it to the available. Should we throw for selection start if it's outside the minimum or maximum?
I don't know. In that case, you kind of get into a nonsense land. But I mean, what does it mean to leave it like that?
Because I guess an alternative, to be more graceful, would be if we detect that we're outside, we basically tack it onto the closest value. So if we less than minimum, we just set it to minimum. If we greater than maximum, we just set it to maximum.
Right, but in that case, you get, and maybe this is, again, design guidelines and all that. In that case, you wind up in a situation where the property gets set to something you didn't expect because you did it in a different order. And you might not get the desired outcome. And it depends. And it's kind of a trade-off. Is an exception better in that case to let the user know that they didn't get what they wanted?
Maybe. Really, it's going to be a question of does changing maximum and minimum also fix up selection start and length when you change it afterwards? But it looks like text box select start again throws for negative numbers. If you've picked a thing that exceeds text length, it will clamp it to the last value, and it preserves length unless it can't, and then it will trim it to fit the right. So it didn't have to deal with the left because left was defined to be 0. So it's text box tries best fit effectively. But both clamping during the property, really is what you want. It feels like what we want is the property remembers the value you wanted for the property, and then the UI, the signals we send to the UI is the clamped value. But I don't know if how well we can maintain that state.
Because what may happen in the designer, user sets So say default selection start is 0, right? And we have our minimum and maximum defaults. At the designer time, user goes, hey, my minimum is 10 and the maximum is 100, but my selection start is 0. If we throw at that point, we essentially breaking at the
then you're getting the user's getting because then the user will get a message saying, hey, property value was invalid for a totally different property than the one that was actually busted. That's a good point.
So that's where I think clamping start to the nearest legal value is probably in order.
That's a good point.
Yeah, because it looks like, again, for text box, what it returns from the get is what it decided in the end. And what it does in the set is try to set the internal value to whatever made sense at the time. But I can't tell by looking here if text depending what it does to these numbers, etc. So I don't know how much of one property changing affects the others in these cases.
Okay, how about we slightly turn it, and like in the text box, you have a method called select where you pass a start and a length. Right, so how about we have a method here, just select, and here's a start and length.
Right, I guess the only question on that would be, does that mean you can't set selection through the designer?
Yeah.
You would be unable to do that, correct?
That would be weird, I think.
Yeah, also, you generally want to be able to retrieve it, so you still need a get selection as well, right?
So I guess it's really just a thing to think about. It doesn't. I mean, it affects the programmatability, but it doesn't affect the shape so much. So it's just things to keep in mind. Weird test cases to consider.
Okay, but in general, we want to avoid throwing if it's automatically adjusted through changing other properties. If we use attempts to set a selection start to something which is outside the boundaries explicitly, then we may want to throw.
Yeah. Do the designers understand dependent property orders?
Not even a little bit.
What do they just write them down alphabetically and we get lucky?
No, isn't there this initialization thing, this interface that the designer sets and says, I'm about to set some value, so please wait until I'm done and then do whatever you want to do?
But that's a runtime thing, right? That makes sure that things work at runtime, or try to work at runtime, but actually configuring the thing, like with the property grid and the designer, is different. Because it's still a control. It's still a runtime control there.
Because in the text box case, right, you can set the text property, and then presumably you can set selection, start, and length. But if that just set it alphabetically, it would end up zeroing everything out because they did the length before there was text, so the effective length was 0. I think. So I'm just wondering how any of that stuff would work. If you have to set, in this case, minimum and maximum before you can set selection, start, and end. Because it generates code, and I just don't know the order it generates it in.
It's typically generated in alphabetical order. It might even be, because this is a code DOM serialization stuff, right? It might even be in metadata order. I'm not even joking, right? This is so old reflection-based stuff. It might be that.
Yeah.
But I couldn't tell you for sure. I think it is sorted alphabetically, but I'm not 100%.
But I mean, doesn't begin in it and end in it in that case take care of those dependencies? Because it
depends on how the control implements that.
Yeah, it depends on implementation.
It supports I support initialize, so I thought it should do that.
Well, but
if the control supports
it should do that, but you can also change properties from the property grid. Then that interface is more.
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to. I'm referring to getting the control right at runtime is one thing, so that the initialized component and the code DOM serialization works out. but making sure that you can set these properties in a sensible way in the property grid and like set it up is also important.
Because
it's kind of in a little bit different, you know.
But I thought the question was targeted to code serialization and instantiating the control in initialized component.
Right, but again, my comment is if the property setters are themselves mutating the value to clamp before they commit the value into memory, then the order that the property grid generates the set statements would affect the value you got in the end.
I would assume that if I support initialize is implemented from the control, then it should kind of make sure that no bad things happen.
I don't know how it can relate start to minimum if we haven't set minimum yet, and the code has an if, and it's going to do something. Maybe you can ask if I'm not fully initialized yet, just trust everything and let's hope it works in the end. But I don't know enough about the model. I just was glancing at one next box.
Quite often, what happens, and that's typical in WinForms land, if handle is created, a message is sent to Win32 with values. If there's no handle created, like we just take and set a property without doing anything.
Yeah, we put it in the, there's a whole bag of state that we can put it in. And
yeah. So at the point when control gets created, like a handle gets created, we just fire all these messages, say, hey, do that. So that's where your pre-initialized things, like where you have your bunch of properties set, we don't affect one another.
Okay.
Well, perhaps may not affect one another. Now where you handle created, let's do the whole thing.
So the property grid can set them in whatever order it wants, and at the time the control actually gets initialized, you'll walk them in what seems the most sensible order and do the clamping that makes sense for the context.
Yes, but there's also the issue that handles the initialization of the component for runtime and the initialize component method. And then there's also the issue of like actually setting those individual properties in the property grid because they are setting properties on a control that's running there, right? And so then you get into these order dependent scenarios there as well. We do have ways to fix that, right? You could have it snap at design time. You could have it do that, move the selection start up or do whatever you want. You could throw exceptions at runtime and then check whether you're in design mode, depending whether the control's cited or not, and do things differently there. But they are somewhat different experiences. Did that make sense?
It does. I mean,
I think it made sense.
I think the designer is largely fine because the user controls the order, right? So long the error messages that the user gets when they set them in the wrong order is also not terrible, right? Like you just have to do it the other way.
That's right.
It's annoying, but you can deal with it. I think to me the question from Jeremy is more important because if the program crashes on startup because the order is unfortunate in the design generated code, that will be bad. But that seems to be taken care of. So I think that's
and to what Igor said, I think these are properties that should not force the controls handle to be created.
Right.
Right. If it's already created, that might be it's something to be concerned. But in this case, they wouldn't the handle wouldn't be created. They would be passed when it was created.
Isn't that what initialize component basically does? It just says like defer until you call me before I actually forward the information to Win32. For the most part.
Maybe. No, I mean it depends on the implementation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it could easily touching a property that, and we can break that, right? In an update. Suddenly now the handle creates earlier than you thought. That can happen,
right?
For sure, and it stinks when it does. It's like, okay, whoops.
Makes sense. All right, I think we captured all of this. I believe.
I'm posting something. If you give me a sec. Which I just want for us to capture. All right, refresh it now, please. Yeah.
Cool.
So just want to capture that what we discussed. So we throw if selection start is less than 0. Oh, sorry, selection length.
Yeah, I was about to say, because SelectionStart can be less than, it can be less than minimum, but minimum can be less than 0, right?
Yeah.
Updated.
Yep,
so
that
selection
makes
length
sense.
is less than 0. If selection length is greater than available, we just clamp it.
Yep.
And selection start clamp it to either min or max if we're outside the boundaries.
Yep. That makes sense to me.
You probably want to do those other two in the last two in the other order, but yeah.
Okay.
All right, so then let's move ahead from this guy.
Yeah, I think that we have only last one.
Yeah.
All right, so I don't think there's no UI unfortunately here. Nothing to really show. So you have to imagine a tree view control with tree nodes, and a proposal is to allow a particular node to be set as bold font. A tree node has a font node font property, which presumably allows you to control the font on the node. However, it looks like there was an underlying issue in Win32, and that goes back like 10 years, where they introduced a new property called bold. And that's basically a proposal to expose the same ability to set a tree node to bold without using the font.
Does this adjust the font property so the font is now bold?
I think it would, inside Win32, do something with the font. And if you scroll down, there's a link to the underlying, I think.
Because this seems kind of out of the model that we have, right, with font and all of that.
Correct. If you please scroll down, Emo.
Yep.
More. Yeah, so that dev blog, that's a link. That basically explains why they added that flag.
Oh no.
In the gist.
This is Raymond's apology. Sorry.
Yeah. So the gist is when you set the bold font to bold, you need to recalculate the boundaries of the node, and that could lead to some clipping or whatever else, and that's why they added a new message or a new flag, which sort of forces like doing that, because when you do it via font, it doesn't.
Which is weird because a font would, if you change the pixel size of the font or the point size or whatever the size means, that would also require a redraw. But
this feels like
true,
such a
but
lazy
like,
Windows.
yeah, he's basically a blog post where he explains all of that.
Yeah. It's just an apology post, though, right? It's like, yeah, we know this is dumb.
Yeah, Windows has a distinction between a bold member of a font family and taking an existing font and boldifying it.
Yeah.
I think this has to do with that distinction. And
I think you're right.
It's because of things like rendering issues.
yeah, so I mean, I guess the question is this bold only representing this flag state and has no relation to the font property? Like, so can this say true and the font says it's not bold? And if you set the font to bold, does this come back true or false? Like,
I would assume this is a fully independent property because it correlates very specifically with that one flag.
Right. Well, but I'm just wondering if like current Windows 10 under the covers will set, if you read this property, if it tells you true, if the font was already a bold font, and is that what we want? And then the setting it changed the font. So if people does the font style maintain object or reference integrity? Like if you read the font off of two different things, are they the same font object? And would they break if you set one node to bold and didn't set the other? So referential integrity feels like it's at risk here if it's not already broken.
Yeah, I totally agree.
But ultimately, we just tell Win32 to do something, right? We just making the use of Win32 API slightly less complicated.
Right, but this is, if right now, if I set on two nodes, I set their font, whatever the font property is, equal to the same object. Can I reliably see that their object.equals the whole time? And then what happens if I set one of the nodes to bold? Does that break the relationship or not? And then does it matter which one I query to find out which font state I get or not?
I would hope that setting this property wouldn't change the font whatsoever,
Right.
because it seems to be a completely independent concept.
And
Yeah, I think these
that's
are
fine.
orthogonal. Yeah.
I'm merely asking the question because I see a potential interrelation. And if they're completely unrelated, that's amazing. And I like it. And then I wonder what happens if I say bold is true and the font is already bold. Is it double
Give me
bold?
like 90 seconds and I'll get an answer for you.
90 seconds. All right.
It's a little confusing, right? Obviously, from a user perspective, it's just kind of one of these unfortunate tree view things that we're just exposing. But that they would be orthogonal, but I think that is how it would work.
That's fine. I mean, I feel like HTML had bold and bolder, and maybe a bold font with this bold makes it bolder. And
Maybe it's semi-bold.
yeah. For some reason, it turns it oblique, a font style you normally can't enter.
I love it.
I'll make it marquee.
So
What
while
about an
Levi
oblique property?
has this little experiment going, by the way, you have 40 seconds left. Are we okay with the API if they're independent?
I like the is bold better. Someone, like somewhere in the thing, somebody suggested the is prefix. And
I kind of do too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's reasonable to me.
it also matches the flag of tree view is bold.
Yeah, if you scroll down little more,
Or is that tree view item
There's
style?
a suggestion from him.
I bet that's tree view item style, the TVIS. I bet that's what that is.
Not knowing the thing, I just read TV is bold. So.
Oh man, I just know what WinForm, what Win32 does, and that's totally going to be like tree view item style.
So Levi, how's it going?
So I see handles are in use in a lot of places, and I'm following where the handles are being passed to. It looks like they're changing the weight of a log font object that's being passed in. They're actually setting a field on it that's called weight and changing it from normal to bold.
Oh really?
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So they might be actually modifying the font associated with the.
Well, I don't necessarily know because they may have duplicated the handle. Like I don't really know.
We need to look. We should look at that.
Yeah.
So, I'd say
I would assume they'd be orthogonal, but it sounds like yeah, maybe not. Who knows?
I'd say the is bold as the property name and adding the property is good, but before we add it, we should understand, if nothing else for documentation purposes, if they're orthogonal or interrelated. And if the font objects are currently maintaining reference integrity and changing the bold is going to do that, that may also be worth a note that because it will effectively change the font on this node, it will break from being the same font as the rest of them on further updates.
Yeah. One thing to also bring up as a small minor point that should not affect this API in my opinion, this does introduce a bug, a small bug in the designer, and as a designer you'll be able to set this property, you won't be able to set this property right now because of how we've implemented, because you'll be able to set it in certain places but not when you bring up like the nodes editor dialog in the designer. You won't be able, this property won't appear there. Mostly because that dialog, how it's implemented, how we've done it in the designer, is that this is a very special case that I don't like having at all. But it actually, basically serializes the data from the .NET Core process and turns it into a .NET Framework TreeNode. And because there will be an impedance mismatch here, And that's because it shows a tree view in that dialog that lives in Visual Studio and has to run on .NET Framework. So that basically you won't be able to set this in the designer unless we do some work in the designer. So I don't think it affects whether we do this or not. I think it's worth adding programmatically. Just wanted to call that out as something.
Or until we move Visual Studio to .NET 5.
When we move to Visual Studio .NET 5, then the bold property will appear for .NET Framework projects and shouldn't. So it's a different bug. Okay, that's it. It's just something to be aware of. This is one of the very few places we've done this. We've tried to keep everything proxying things from the old from the .NET Core side, and you really using the information from there. But in this case, because we have a preview tree view in that dialog, we decided to go just keep the .NET Framework tree view and hope that nobody suggested adding anything to TreeNode. You have dashed our hopes.
Is it possible to have, I guess, conditionals around it, whether we're in .NET Framework or .NET Core?
No, unfortunately, no. It's literally stuff. The way that dialog works is it's got a property grid in it, and you put an object in there, and that object happens in this case to be a .NET Framework tree node. There are ways potentially to work around this. Klaus and I were talking about this the other day, but it's pieces of work we haven't done yet. It's fine. It just, this property won't be settable from there. It's totally settable, programmatically though.
Because all the other API we considered today, most of them would be good to have designer support.
Well, those will all work fine.
Available in .NET 5, and our design in 3.1, or someone that designs an application for 3.1.
Those will all work fine. Those will all work fine. In this case, this is the one case where we actually take a .NET Core object and serialize the data across and create .NET Framework objects out of it. In ListView and all of those, we're proxying the real objects. They live over in another .NET Core process. We're pulling over the property information from there. Those will all work fine. This is the one particular API that won't. Just wanted to call it out for you.
So, devil's advocate question, is there an existing place that we could stuff this data that would make it settable? Like, is there an enum that if we added this, a flag enum that if we added it to the flag enum, it would just work?
The way it's implemented, you would have to add it to the framework, to .NET Framework.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the problem. And we've got ways to fix it. It's just it's a lot of work.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Just
all right. So.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it.
Does everybody agree with my conclusion? I just marked it as API needs work because I would say it's depending on this investigation whether there is a relationship between the two. And then if there isn't, we can just flip it, and then that's the end of it.
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
Yeah,
cool.
that's reasonable to me.
If there is a dependency, or like that relation, what do we do?
I mean, the question really is, if there is a dependency, then you just need to decide whether it's something that you think that you can reason about in documentation or expect users to understand, or if it's so confusing that it's better to just leave this out of the API altogether.
Okay.
So it's just a question you'd have to decide. So really we're just saying there's follow-up and a decision to be made, but unless you change the shape, we'll say okay.
Okay, so would we need to have another API review, or we can basically make a decision within the team, that being WinForms team, saying that we can update documentation, or we just accept it as is, or we just decline it? Do we need to have another API review?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I would. It seems like more work for you than necessary.
Okay. So we basically we take these points, we work as a team to either take it or decline it. Cool. Thank you.
And
that's
if we do this, file another bug for the designer. We'll fix it someday.
Right.
Cool.
All right.
I think that's the end of it.
That should be the end of it, yes. Unless somebody filed a new issue while we were reviewing it. No, good for you.
We can certainly talk task dialogue if you wish, but I'm happy to give you the half an hour back.
Yeah, is it something we can do in half an hour? Because if we can't, then it seems like We better reschedule for some time that we have longer than half an hour.
No, we should reschedule.
Yeah, we have some work to do internally to figure out
But we resolved the buttons API design. So the buttons, so there is a single way of setting buttons, be that a standard button, yes, no, cancel, maybe, or custom buttons where a user can provide their own custom text, or command links.
Igor,
There's just
we should reconsider the thing as a whole. I would suggest to not doing this now.
Yeah, that seems
I'm just updating emo because so buttons are resolved. We have work to do with multi-page dialog now. We need to sort out.
Sounds good. All right, then get the half an hour
Thank
back,
you all.
everybody, and then hope to see you at some point again.
Yes, when
Thanks, folks,
coronavirus is dead.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.